With the Bitcoin mining tax blocked in that debt ceiling deal, Bruce Rogers of LM Funding America explains what it means for the mining industry. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the U.S. debt ceiling for our main story. As you know, earlier this week, lawmakers reached a deal to avoid a default on the country's debt, and that bill just passed the House. One important thing that bill seems to leave out is Biden's plan to tax Bitcoin mining energy use by 30%. I spoke to LM Funding America's CEO, Bruce Rogers, about whether that tax is gone for good and whether crypto is about to get a lot more scrutiny from Washington. All right, so let's start with the news on the debt ceiling. The White House's proposal to tax Bitcoin miners by 30% for their energy use appears to be dead, according to a congressman from Ohio. It's not included in the debt ceiling deal, but obviously that's a win for miners in the immediate sense. Do you think that fight is over, or is Washington going to continue this fight on energy use from Bitcoin?
Well, politics requires every expenditure requires having an offsetting tax. And so Bitcoin's not a real popular group of people right now. And then throwing a 30% tax on their energy consumption, it creates a big number, but it would never realistically create any revenue. So I think the fact that it wouldn't realistically create revenue and would instead probably drive Bitcoin mining elsewhere is the key to whether or not we'll see it again. But again, you may see it again Bitcoin miners don't have huge lobbies and no one will be defending it for the most part. So we'll probably be targets for these kind of balancing the budget moves in the future.
How big of an issue do you see crypto becoming in Washington? Is it going to be a bigger issue as we ramp up into 2024?
Right. For Washington to pay attention, the rest of America needs to pay attention. And for the rest of America need to pay attention, Bitcoin needs to create some use cases that affect everybody in their day-to-day lives. We have a halving event coming up in 2024 and another one in 2029. By the 2029 halving event, Bitcoin miners like our company are going to need to have significant transaction fee revenue to replace the loss of mining reward revenue. Right now, those use cases just aren't out there. Bitcoin is, the Bitcoin conference, the biggest use cases were like the S&H green stamp models. We'll give some people some Satoshis if they come to our site. You don't need a blockchain to do that. You just need something people want. Looking all over for Bitcoin use cases, I think the best place to start, and I keep saying this to the counterparties I deal with out there, the people who sell me mining machines and the people who rent me hosting space, we all three ought to be on some sort of blockchain contract and transact in Bitcoin because that's what we're trying to achieve.
I want to talk about the other thing that's happening in Washington right now, and that is regulations, particularly regulation by enforcement from the SEC. There hasn't been a lot of guidance from Congress in terms of rulemaking for the crypto industry. And so the SEC has sort of taken it into its own hands and said there are already rules, whether it's the Howley test or some of the other regulations that have been put in place over the years. Do you think that strategy of regulation by enforcement is working for the crypto industry so far this year, or does Congress need to act here and maybe more quickly than it has so far?
Well, in any industry, regulation by enforcement is not the best because it's done on a case-by-case basis and only sort of addresses one problem at a time, not necessarily in the right order. Whereas if you're drafting legislation, you can say, well, what are we trying to achieve? And you can sort of create an overall goal and then fit pieces of the puzzle in where they all kind of flow the same direction. So that legislation would be best. However, we've got great big large businesses operating in the crypto space that when we first took a look at entering this space, looked at it and said, gee, how are they doing that legally? And the answer is they probably aren't. I mean, they're selling securities. So what we need is a way to have registered securities in crypto sold by registered broker dealers on registered exchanges. We're at the position where the SEC has approved one token as a security and registered it. They have recently approved Prometheum as a special purpose broker dealer that can custody assets. And Prometheum has an ATS capability to do dark pool transfer. So eventually they'll be able to probably close in both sides of trades. And then the last piece is we need an exchange, a regulated exchange that the SEC approves and it could be NASDAQ or it could be New York, it could be anybody that jumps through the hurdles. But we need a place to sell the stuff. Now, Bitcoin is outside of that. We're a commodity and it's a different issue. But the rest of crypto definitely needs some clarity on that. And then the fairness issue is this: if these companies that are involved in crypto right now are not complying with existing laws, why should they be grandfathered in for jumping the gun on this? Why don't we clear the decks and let people that start off within a compliant way go forward and build this? And that may be our best path to Washington, is to come forward as responsible participants in it.
Is there anything that comes to mind in your industry, specifically in the Bitcoin mining space, that you see as important for regulatory clarity? Is there something that the Bitcoin mining industry is wanting for specifically?
Bitcoin miners largely need to be let alone and participate in the free market. The chief criticism of Bitcoin mining is its consumption of energy. And that's sort of a red herring. They always say, oh, you consume more energy than this country or that country. Let's understand, in the U.S., energy is regulated. Hospitals get first pick. I live on a hospital grid during hurricanes. I'm always reminded of it. And then the rest of the allocation is done on the free market principle to whoever wants to pay whatever price is there. The utilities are guaranteed a profit, so they're rather agnostic to who the users are. And we've never had any sort of morality legislation around electricity for breweries, YouPorn, et cetera. So Bitcoin should be no different. We just like to be treated like everybody else. Bitcoin miners seek the cheapest power in the most remote places they can find because that's conducive to Bitcoin mining. Mm-hmm. So I guess if we could just be left alone, not singled out for a 30% excise tax, I believe we can put together a reasonable business.